today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make a full 1605 UMEK Space 92 style techno track. As usual, I'm going to be showing you guys a bunch of new stuff. I've learned a bunch of new techniques for the style, as well as how to make it sound a lot cleaner than some of the stuff I've shown you guys in the past. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. As always, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI presets, literally everything from the full 7-minute arrangement to the track is available at the top of the description. And if you're patient on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. Thank you so much to everybody who goes and picks up these files. It really helps support me. Plus, you get a really awesome full track arrangement that you can work with a bunch of samples and presets and MIDI. So yeah, thank you very much everybody, and let's get started with the video. Alright, so here we are, we're on 130 BPM, 36 tracks, and right off the bat, that's something I think is important to talk about while we're talking about like a full track here. It's just like the amount of stuff that you're actually going to have. It's really not going to be that many crazy synths. You notice that most of these tracks here are just like effects, and even some of them that are synths are still just like little synth effects, Really, like, in terms of your like main stuff, like your kick, your bass, the leads, the hi-hats, all that kind of stuff, those sorts of sounds, it's really just about having like a few main things and being able to really mostly just focus on those. Like, the track needs to stand on the foundation of those elements, and then like I said, like most of these tracks are just going to be background effects and stuff like that, but it's really not as many as you might think. Like, a lot of people might think you'd have like 50 or 100 or something, but again, like, I think having 36 tracks here speaks to just making it focused around like a really good kick, really good lead, really good sounds for everything that's sort of like the main sounds, and then just having a few background effects. So the first thing up here is the kick, which, as you can hear, also includes some stuff that's not really the kick. So it starts off with just our main kick, which is just, you can see this nice kick. I made this myself with some saturation and layering and stuff. Bit of multi-band distortion. And then that's being layered with this, which is another kick I made, but then we're just high passing that, so you just have that. And you can hear that just adds some nice punch on top of the kick. So we're doing that, and then we also have this rumble here, which is a pretty standard techno rumble. It's made using the kick. So what we're doing is essentially it's just da 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 da, and then we have some reverb, a bit of amp. So you can hear that kind of creates like a more rumbly kind of textured sound, and then we have a low pass, side chaining into the main kick. And then this here is just to cut out, I've talked about this a lot, so I won't cover it too much, but this is just to cut out that low end that you wouldn't really hear, but it would mess up your mix. Then finally we have this rolling bass, and this is just like a simple sort of side trancey bass, which I once said I would never cover side trance on this channel, but it's bled over into techno. So yeah, that's just playing the root note, 16th notes, and then what's happening is we're making this with wavetable here, so it's 2 different layers. And I really think you need to use like 2 or 3 wavetables to make these, because you really need to get like a full like kind of layered sound with these. Like, that's how you get that like very kind of crunchy mid-rangey texture. You guys know what I'm talking about. You've heard it in these tracks, like, and you just don't really get that from just like 2 oscillators. Like, you have to, even though this is just 3, like, still like just having, really it's 4 because we have the sub in there, but just having like multiple wavetables stacked on top of each other is really going to be the key here, I think. And the other thing is that you can do unison on some of them and do it like different and stuff. You can see what we've done here is we have this first one, which is just a pulse wave going to a low pass filter with an envelope, and then that's got some unison. And then the second one is these 2 wavetables, and then that's got some unison as well, and the same thing with the low pass with the envelope on it. And then we also have the envelope on the wavetable positions as well, but not on this one. And yeah, you can hear how when we put the 2 layers together, it really fills it out. Then those are going into a phaser, so here's without that. And with it, it's not got any movement on it. It's just kind of like adding a sort of filter to the sound, kind of giving it a different texture. I also have this limiter here. So that's not actually to limit it. We actually are getting a little bit of clipping there, which doesn't really matter, but It's just because you can hear without it. And then with it. Like when you turn that on, it just adds that more like animated kind of like feel. Like obviously, you know, it's just a bit of compression, but it kind of just pulls the bass up and makes it feel a little bit more lively. And it's one of those things where it's like, you know, it might technically be wrong, but if it sounds good, it is good. And then we just have a compressor, side chaining it to the main kick, and then I have a high pass filter. And then on the group there, the only thing is just this EQ, which is doing that same thing it was doing on the Rumble. And then I have this high pass, which you can see comes on a pretty good amount of times throughout the track. This high pass automation is really going to make your track like very dynamic, you know, because if you just have the kick without this, and it's not like turning on and off and doing like these little 1 bar like kind of things like that, it can get a bit boring. So you got to make sure you have like that kind of like changing thing in the low end there. And yeah, then we have the main lead. So this is a pretty simple melody. What it's doing is it's just walking down this minor scale. It's like that very popular techno scale. So we're using, essentially we're in the key of F sharp. So the notes we're doing here, root note, 6th, 5th, 5th, 4th, 4th, 9th, which is really just one note down from the minor third, as you can see. And then it goes 9th. And then it finally resolves on that minor third. And then really, obviously, it ends on the root note. So it's a very kind of like satisfying melody, because you're walking down the scale, and the first note that it plays up here too is kind of an uneasy one. Like if you listen to that, you know, even that right there is kind of starting it off. So that then when we get back to the, it's very satisfying. And that's how you want to think about it. You know, it's just like that perfect musical sort of resolution, but like walking your way to that. Like just knowing when to give that up. And then also the rhythm is obviously like very kind of bouncy. And it's really playing off of the kick. Now for the sound here, this is 3 layers. So what we have is we have this first wavetable, which is just one saw wave with a little bit of unison. It's only on 2 voices. It's not really like a super saw. It's more just kind of like a saw wave with a little bit more width and a little bit more like chorusy. But obviously it's not really meant to be that like big super saw. This is just to give you a stereo layer. But if you turn up the voices too much, see, like I was trying to avoid that. Like obviously we could do that, but you really just want this to be more like a saw wave, but just with something a little bit more futuristic to it, essentially. And the other thing that's going on here is you can see we have a little bit of this envelope too on the pitch. So that's just giving it a little bit more of a pluck. That's how it has that like on the sound. And then this layer is the same thing, but without any unison. You can see we actually don't have the pitch on there. But it's just like a nice fat saw wave. So you can hear when we put those together, you just get, essentially, it's this main, it's just like a nice clean saw wave. But it just has that really nice kind of stereo layer underneath it. And then we also have this operator, which all this is just a bit of white noise with a high pass filter. It's just because there isn't really noise inside a wavetable, so I just added an extra one. Instrument racks are really useful for that. But this lead is really about just like not messing it up. Like, you know, a saw wave on its own, and especially if you just add that like little bit of like noise and the unison layer behind it, a saw wave on its own can be really fat. It's just when you start doing like too much reverb and too much filtering and too much saturation and stuff like that, and compression too, that it can kind of take away from that. But really just like a nice saw wave on its own with like some nice layers like this, like as long as you level it out right, it can sound really good. And then we just have a little bit of EQ boosting the highs, a bit of reverb, which you can see we got the dry wet at only 24%. So that's what I mean, like you really don't need that much wetness on the reverb to hear it. And then we just have the saturator, which is on the medium curve setting, so that's making it a little bit fatter without taking away from the sound. And then I have this auto pan here, which is just to make it bounce off of the kick. You can see that automates so that it turns off in the break. And then finally just this low pass filter, which just brings it in there. And then underneath that, we just have these break hi-hats. So these are just some hi-hats from one of my sample packs, actually. And all that's happening is it just comes in the break here. And you can see they filter up. And then you get to there and they start fading out with this reverb. So, you know, just kind of a nice transitional element. The thing is, these little background things are really important in the break. Like the way we have like a constantly happening there. If you don't have that, it's actually going to be missing like that kind of rhythm. And I think the energy will be off. Like if we turn these off. Obviously it's got the arp, which is good, but makes a big difference there. So again, just some simple ones from one of my packs. Then we have the break bass. So this is, again, we're in the key of F sharp minor, so we're starting root note, minor third, fourth, and then sixth. So it's just kind of like that, you know, more epic, kind of like big cosmic techno style progression. The key here is just like really choosing the notes carefully, because I think it's really easy to do kind of the same patterns over and over. Like, you know, we've all heard like, and we've all heard, like those patterns have been used so many times, right? So it's just like really taking your time and like not just starting with one of those and kind of forgetting it, but maybe you play around with one of those and write a melody, but then, you know, try changing some of the notes and try just getting a little bit creative. Like here we could have followed dun 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 dun. That would have been really simple, but instead I broke it up by changing that last note to the sixth, so now it kind of gives it a little bit more dark feel. And just kind of thinking about it like that rather than just like sort of setting it and forgetting it. For the sound on this one, it's also 2 layers of wavetable. So we've got this. You can see this is just a saw wave with a very heavy unison on there. And then this layer, which is 2 saw waves which are detuned, but they have no unison. So I find if you layer these together, you get the best bass. Like if you only use the unison one, you don't really get the fullest sound because it can be a little bit too kind of like watery, if that makes any sense. But then if you only use this layer where there's no unison, it doesn't have enough of the watery sound. So combining them, you get the best of both. And those are just going into an amp, which you can see I've got the dry wet at 22%, so it's just kind of like blending that with the dry signal. I have a low pass filter, so you'll notice this is never in the same place twice. It's pretty much constantly building all the way through here. So it's a very dynamic sound that way. Like, you know, if we skip to like here, it's very different from here. And then we also have this high pass filter, which just brings it in here. Because one thing I've noticed in my tracks, if you have the bass hit too hard at the beginning of the drop, if you play it in the club, it's going to feel really weird. Or like at a rave, like it's just a little bit too intense to have the intro, which has a lot of bass, and then you lose a little bit of bass maybe as you're kind of fading out of that. And then all of a sudden you just come boom with this big respace. So you need to make sure that you like fade that in. And it's really simple. You just get a high pass filter. And this way, like, the break really feels like it's fading in when you're in, like, a party like that. And then finally, we just have this EQ to cut out a bit of low end, because it's kind of that same thing I was talking about with the kick, but also you want to make sure that this doesn't have more low end than the kick. If your break bass is too fat, like it's fatter than your kick and your rumble, ultimately, when you get back into your drop, it's going to feel really weak. So you got to make sure, like, this is still a really fat bass, but just doing a little thing like that at the end to make sure that it never quite surpasses the standard set by the kick and the rumble. Then we have our ARP. So this is just kind of this crazy pattern, which is in the F sharp minor scale. Like I'm just using like root note, 5th, 6th, and then another root note. So like, for example, that's only 3 notes, but you're just hearing it over and over. And then here it's the same things, but now we go down to the minor 7th. And it also ends on that. Like it's all just notes from that scale again, but it's just like kind of voicing it correctly. Like for example, keeping these 2 middle notes here, but changing the top and bottom notes. But then to switch it up, once we get to bar 5 here, then it just completely changes. So like, but then there's kind of symmetry there. Like here you notice in the middle it was the 5th and the 6th, and then here it is the 9th and the minor 3rd. So they're still kind of like lining up there, but just getting a little bit more creative. And then this at the end is just a straight up major chord. For the sound on this one, this is made with wavetable. It's just a saw wave, and then we have this clipped sweep here, which I'm pretty sure I was using that above for one of those bass stabs. But yeah, we've got that, and then there's the low pass filter here, which you can see has got a lot of automation on it. So it's kind of like I was talking about with the bass there. It's just like having something that's constantly changing so that you never just hear the exact same thing twice, essentially. And you'll notice when the kick is playing and when it's like the main part of the track, it's just the beginning of the ARP. It's just that first 2 bars over and over and over again. And yeah, it's also got a bit of unison. We have this phase sync. So this is something I really like about wavetable, is that you got all these different unison modes. So you can really get a lot of different sounds out of this. I've got a bit of echo, some reverb, a drum bus to make it a bit fatter, and then this auto pan, which is just doing that sidechain kind of effect. A high pass filter, and then another low pass filter, which has a bit more automation on it. You know, to like really bring it down there, because if we get rid of this, even though the filter on the synth is down there, it's not really that deep. So this just kind of makes it a bit deeper, so it can really fade in and be a little bit more impactful with the arrangement. Then we have this little bass stab, which this is really kind of grooving with the kick. You hear like, we have one layer where it's, well, first it's the kick and the rumble, so that's already doing boom, boom, boom. But then on top of that we have from the rolling bass, and then now we add on this extra, and it's all these different movements happening. That essentially create the groove in the track. And yeah, so for the sound on this one, this is made with Operator. This is actually a pretty simple bass stab. So what we have is just 2 sine waves here. And you can see we're using the envelope on the second one to make it kind of pluck, but they're just doing FM with each other. Where you can see we also have the first oscillator at 0.5 and the second one at 2. So having that like a bit higher kind of gives you more punch there. I also have a low pass filter with a bit of an envelope, and then the hard shaper, which the shaper actually makes a big difference. If I turn the filter off, you can hear it's not quite as fat. And we also have a pitch envelope to make it punch a little bit more. I have a high pass filter, this auto pan just making it bounce off of the kick, a low pass which just brings it in the intro, and then this reverb here, which is just being used actually to kind of wash it out there. And you'll notice also, this has a lot of reverb on it, even when that's off. It's because it's going through this send, which I'm going to talk about those at the end. But then we have the cymbals. Pretty straightforward. We got like main hi-hat, low layer, high layer. We have a shaker, which is just one of mine. And then we have this ride here, which this is just going through a bit of echo to give it kind of like that stereo feel. I've got a high pass filter and then just a high end boost there. And then we don't have anything on the group. The high cymbals are just going to stay pretty clean. And then down here we have all the effects. So it kind of starts with like this group of stuff. you can hear it's like we have kind of the different groups of effects sort of talking to each other. Like, then we have down here, like, all these ones, but that's how you want to think about it. We have, like, our main groove, but then we also have that stuff playing off of, like, and see, like, when you break it down like this, it's not that complicated, but when you hear it in a track, it can seem like a lot more layers than it is. You just have to get that constant, like, repetitive, like, again, the main groove, but then this kind of stuff bouncing off of it as well. So this little group of stuff is pretty simple. It's like this sound, which is just one of my effects that I chopped up. And you can see the sends are really useful for these because you can give everything kind of like the same space. We have like this clap, which is just going through a bit of reverb. And then these little bass stabs, which are actually kind of similar to that one I showed you above. So you can see these are both made with FM. The second one here has a square wave, but the first one's actually pretty similar to that first bass stab where it's just sine waves here. And yeah, it got the shaper on there and the pitch envelope, and then this one also has the same. But what's happening here is these kind of like bounce off each other to get that like diddle diddle. And then on the group there, I just have a high pass filter. Then underneath that, we have like this wavetable bass stab. Just like a nice like. So this is actually just made with two saw waves here, a bunch of unison, and then it just plays like these long notes. But I've got the envelope set up so that it goes and kind of gets quieter there. So it's not just like one long held out note, but it looks like that. And that's going through a phaser, which kind of same deal as I was showing you above with that rolling bass. It's not got any movement, it's just giving it a different texture. We have a reverb. I have a bit of multiband distortion, which you'll notice that none of these are 100% wet. Like, this is always blended with that original sound, because it's like I was saying above, you know, like, just some good saw waves, they sound good enough on their own. You don't really need to do too much to make that sound better, but you can do stuff like this to give it a different texture, but we still want to preserve that underneath it. We don't want to completely cover that up with a distortion. And then I also have a little bit of drum mush just to make it even fatter. A high pass filter, because if you don't do that, this can really get in the way of like the kick. Like if you just solo this with the rumble, if I turn off that high pass, obviously, yeah, it completely knocks it out of the way. So you got to make sure you do stuff like that when you're working with this kind of stuff on top of a rumble and bass stabs. But then we have a low pass filter, which just brings it in the intro. You'll notice, like, in the intro, there's a lot of automations that you don't see in this part over here. Like, you know, I kind of think of this as like A, B, and then C, and then maybe D if you want to say like the outro after like the synths kind of drop out is part D. But essentially, like, there's a lot of stuff that like is gonna build here, but then once we get to here, obviously this builds a little bit, but it's not the same as this part. So it's kind of like telling the listener, like, this part is meant to be a lot more energy than part A. Like, that's how you have to kind of set it up if you want that to really be the feel of the track. But then I also have this auto pan here, and yeah, that's pretty much it for that one. Then we just have like this little bass stab is just some FM stuff with sine waves and some chorus and some amp. I've got this, which is just like some noise, you know, just like, again, all these little background sounds just kind of add up. And make up the big picture. We have like the snare. And then pretty much everything under that is like, you know, just like building stuff. Like we have like a build snare and like this operator. We have like all these little like sweeps. Reverb claps. I also have these effects in the intro. You'll notice like there's some stuff that only happens in the intro, so that as soon as you hear the track, there's something that can immediately grab your attention. So it's not just kind of like if you get rid of this stuff, like I'll just throw it in a group really quick. You know, like there's tracks where it's just like the kick for the first minute or so. Like you can do that, and especially with like certain styles of techno, that is definitely the move. But I feel like with this style, you want to make it a little bit more exciting right off the bat. Like this style is about grabbing the listener's attention right away. So just having stuff like this, and it's pretty simple. These are just a bunch of my effects, just kind of fitting in there rhythmically. And then once we get to here, there's just this one. And then that's the end of those, because we've already started like the main arrangement of the track now. And this kind of separates this first 32 bars from the rest of the track as well. Because again, like, you know, if you wanted to, this track could just be this for the whole thing. But that would get really boring, right? So these are the little ways where you have that happening for the whole track. But then because these little things are happening and changing in different ways and kind of like being taken apart this way, ultimately the track feels like a lot more than just the kick and the hi-hat groove over and over. And yeah, so that's pretty much everything in the track. But then the last thing to talk about here are these sends. And I think these are really important because these allow you to do two things. One, you save CPU and you can more easily kind of give all of your sounds like a bit of space. You can kind of make that a little bit more even as well. Like everything is going to feel more like kind of in the same place because it's going into the same reverbs and echoes and stuff. But also what it allows you to do is it allows you to kind of add this like extra layer onto your track. And like I was saying at the beginning, you know, these tracks are about making like a solid kick, solid leads, like that kind of stuff, and then kind of letting that shine. Like you don't need to have all this extra stuff. The effects are just kind of happening for a moment, but it's really about those main things. So these are like a nice way to just kind of add an extra layer of sound. But the thing is that it's not like just going and adding an extra percussion loop or like a background arp or something like that that's going to take away from your main sounds. It's just using the main sounds to create more sound in your track essentially. And ultimately your track is going to feel bigger and tighter. So I really think this is a great way to work. I've talked about this a lot before, but you can see pretty much everything is going through these. Like I have the main lead going through these, or through the first one. But then we have like some effects going through that same send. So now like when those effects happen, like we play this part. You know, you just have that little like atmospheric loop happening in the background, or like this. You know, so it can add a lot of sound without having to go and add like I said, like a bunch of extra layers that are going to take away from your main element. And yeah, so that's going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available right at the top of the description. And if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there, because it's already available. Thank you so much for the support, everybody. The sample pack is just $10, but you get this great arrangement and full template that you can work with. Plus, it really helps support me so I can keep bringing you guys new videos every day. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.